John, it's good to talk to you. When were you born and how did you progress towards the BBC?
Well, I was born in 1943 in Southgate in North London, and that's not very far, of course, from Alexandra Palace. It's the nearest BBC place, and you'll see why that's significant later.
So this big mast was always in your view, was it?
No, it wasn't that close. We were 5 miles away. It became significant later because I worked in that very building in Alexandra Palace for a portion of my career in the BBC. But that's going forward now. Well, I was always interested in science and technology at school. And in the 1950s, I showed an interest in, basic audio mixing, presentations, and my other hobby was meteorology. So I think probably one significant thing happened, and we go back to Alexandra Palace, and that was that my dear father in 1949 purchased our very first television set. It was a Bush TV 12A 9-inch sepia screen television. Yes. You see them in very old films these days. Now, this is before the coronation, of course, and it was obviously of great interest to me. And then he said, well, come with me. He took me in the car and he took me to Alexandra Palace, 5 miles away, stood me under the mast, and he pointed to it and he said, John, that is where television comes from. And that was so significant in my whole life.
So that sort of gave you an interest in television?
Well, it gave me an interest in the fact that broadcasting happens and this is where it comes from. So, yes. And then after A-levels, I had to, for medical reasons, take a local job. And so I went to the Odeon in Southgate, which is a very big Odeon, and became a projectionist there, starting off as a trainee and rapidly rising up to, with A-levels, you can imagine, rapidly rising up to being the assistant to the chief projectionist. I was there for 15 months. Mainly, it wasn't my intention to be there that long, but I had to wait for the BBC to grant me an interview, and also I was also interested in meteorology and was waiting for the Met Office to grant me an interview. So all this made it a little bit protracted.
Did the BBC get to you first?
I had both, actually, offers, and the BBC was the one I chose in 1963, and it was for the technical operator in the engineering division.
The interview, was it done at Portland Place?
I believe it was, yes. I think maybe in the Langham, which of course the BBC owned at that time. I can remember the lattice gates that there were. You may remember them
that
as
dreadful
well.
lift. Well, it was a wonderful lift, really.
Yes, that's right, yeah. Yeah, I think it was in the Langham. I think that's where the original interview was. But I felt so privileged to go up there into BBC land and be granted an interview.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 1964, on the 6th of April was my very first day of working at the BBC. And in those days, the BBC looked after their staff so well, and we had to start with a 1-week induction course, as they called it, where we went round to many of the studios and other technical premises, if you like, in and around London. Places like Brookman's Park, which was the transmitter at that time, television centre, obviously, broadcasting house, Bush House, all these places, just to give us a flavour of what the BBC was like in the London area. But I was actually destined for London Control Room, which is the main sort of hub of everything at that time in Broadcasting House. This took just 1 week. As I say, on the 6th of April it started. I was just 21 then. On the 4th of April I was 21, and the 6th of April I was my first day there. I started on a salary, by the way, of £735 a year. I remember that as well.
And was it a probationary year? Did you get...
No, we became established after 2 years, but there was one other thing that we had to do, and that was to go to the Engineering Training Department, ETD, at Evesham in Worcestershire, for 4 months. So from the 13th of April 1964, for 4 months, I went to Evesham, and it was fantastic. I couldn't believe how lucky I was to be in such an environment with all these studios, some of which had been left over from the wartime use of Evesham, because that was the centre near Birmingham where a lot of broadcasting came from. So we had all these wonderful studios and some television, 2 television studios at Evesham as well. It was just an environment that I settled in so wonderfully. However, right at the end of the 4 months, 1 week from the end or 2 weeks from the end, there was an examination, and we had quite a number of papers to sit, and I think some practical tests as well, as far as I can remember. And you had to pass this examination. Otherwise, you were kicked out of the BBC. It was that severe. Not many were, though.
You couldn't retake them.
You couldn't retake them, no. And we were told, in fact, that of the original people who applied for this job of technical operator, of those people, 1 in 5 got through the interview, the original interview, the one in the Langham, and of those, 1 in 12 got through. So when we were at Evesham, we looked behind us and we thought, well, there were sort of 59 people, 12 5s to 60, there were 59 people behind us had actually originally applied for these jobs, so we felt so privileged to be there.
That's an extraordinary statistic. I hadn't heard that before, so that's something new.
I would just add to that to say that Evesham, actually, an engineering training department, became a familiar territory to me, because later on in my career, when I was a senior sound person, I used to go down to give talks to producers about the art of sound, or the art and craft, if you like, of sound.
Yes.
And I used to go down and give talks there, and I used to go down also on all sorts of courses there later on in my career. It was a wonderful place. Sadly, no more as far as the BBC is concerned. However, it's a very nice hotel, because my wife and I called in to see what it was like a couple of years ago, and we were treated very well by the people there, and they showed us around. The building, of course, is just a hotel now. The BBC owns some of it, but we weren't allowed in there 2 years ago. Even with my pass or anything, I still couldn't get in. They said no.
There's still training there, I think.
There is, but I, as a past person there who used to go there a lot, was prohibited by the people on the gate from going in at all.
Oh, very sad.
Which I thought was sad. Yes, it was sad.
Did you get down into the bunkers and the regional centre of government area?
Originally, yes, but we couldn't do any of that, of course.
No, of course not recently.
In more recent times.
It was an extraordinary place.
1964 then continued, and in August I went, as the BBC called it, on station, and that meant that I went to Broadcasting House, which was my destination, if you like, and into the control room at Broadcasting House.
Mm-hmm.
And there I went on to the most junior position, and that was C&M positions, control and monitoring positions, where we connected lines between correspondents of foreign broadcasting organisations with their broadcast organisations in their countries themselves. So you get a circuit to, to Australia, say, or something like that, and you'd have to set up the circuit between the correspondent they had in London with Australia. And often I used to be put on the French circuits, because I was at that time pretty fluent in French, and technical French isn't that difficult anyway, to be honest. I set up circuits to, obviously, France, and Lausanne in Switzerland, and Quebec and Montreal in Canada. All the French-speaking places, I sort of specialised in those. And this was the junior position, though, in the control room, which was quite a large place on the first floor of the extension to Broadcasting House, which doesn't exist any longer because new Broadcasting House has been built there. A number of things happened there. For example, as the junior person, there were about maybe 6 of us on these C&M positions, and we had the technical operations manager and his assistant, the assistant technical operations manager, called Tom and Atom, as you can imagine. And the Atom would quite often say, "It's a dry shift," he'd say, looking round to we junior people. And one of us would have to go up and get about 18 coffees from the restaurant on the 8th floor and bring them down in the lift with all the plastic spoons floating on the top so they didn't slop over. However, after that junior position and others in the main control room, I specialised in continuities and went to the continuity unit, which in those days was home, light and third, of course, before radios 1, 2, 3, 4 came. And when we were in the continuity unit, we were sitting alongside the announcer who comes in between the programmes and announces them. And it was our job to cue the programmes in and to spin the tapes in. We had large tape machines there. When we were in home, light and third, there was overnight accommodation provided for us in the Langham. So if you were closing down, say, the light programme, which was fairly late at night, you go across to the Langham and have a couple of hours of sleep. They actually provided a bed and everything in those days. And the phone would ring in the corner of the room to give you an alarm call, and then you were back into Broadcasting House on the other side of the road, and you'd be opening up the third programme, which was a later opening. So that was quite good. I did have a few little incidents in the continuities because, of course, you were live on transmission the whole time. On one occasion, I can remember I was replaying a tape which had an enormous, this is a 1/4-inch tape, of course, in those days, having an enormous number of edits in it. I think 208 we counted, edits in it. Well, it was called Who Knows? It was a science programme with science specialists answering questions from the public. And inevitably, one of these tape edits broke. But fortunately, it broke after the tape had passed through the capstan on the tape machine. And so I simply fed it all off into the waste bin. It wasn't taking up on the take-up spool at all, so I fed it all off onto the waste bin. But the show went on. The other time, as I distinctly remember, we were just about to start a thing called Grand Hotel on the home service. And Grand Hotel was a programme of music, and the announcer started to introduce his head. And now we joined Reginald Leopold and his Palm Court Orchestra in the hall of the Grand Hotel, and they are now playing so-and-so, announcing the piece of music. Unfortunately, I was listening on pre-fade on the headphones, and they weren't playing it at all. There was nothing for me to fade into. I was supposed to tickle the music in under the announcement. There was nothing there. My fault completely. I didn't know this, but there was normally in the continuities, we had a system called Flicks and a Steady. Now, what that is, we could remotely operate the red light in the studio, and what you did, as you were approaching the transmission, you flick the red light on the continuity console, so the studio red light would flash. The studio manager would buzz back to say they were ready, and then you give them a steady red when they went ahead. Now, with Grand Hotel, it was custom and practice, but I didn't know because I was new to the unit then, that the red light, as soon as that went on, it was an early red you had to give, so the orchestra would see that come on and start playing so that I could fade into it. But unfortunately, I didn't know that, so they all started playing rather rapidly as soon as the red light came on, and we made up a few seconds lost then later on. And after I finished with the continuity unit, which was after about a year or so, I felt once again very privileged to work there on transmission, being the only person per network on the particular network next to the announcer. And at the age of 23, that wasn't bad, I thought.
I hadn't heard of people being put in such a responsible position at that age. I must say, from any of the people we've interviewed, it's the first time I've heard that.
The continuity unit was a little sort of offshoot, if you like, from control room. And so it was a natural progression for those of us that like doing the mixing of sound, which is what I was interested in. I moved around quite a bit in radio to get experience. I moved actually to the tape editing unit next, which was on the 5th floor of extension of Broadcasting House. And that's where we were cutting and splicing 1/4-inch tapes with producers alongside. Sometimes they weren't. But there was a lot of work done there in the various editing suites, and I was part of that.
It was quite time-consuming, wasn't it, editing and splicing material?
Time-consuming. Also, you have to have the ability to be able to distinguish sound sounds themselves rather than thinking of them as words or anything. For example, if you're editing a retake onto another piece that didn't go particularly well, you have to make sure that the retake edits on in such a way that you can't detect where the join is. And often the way of doing this is to get what's called a vocal pause in the middle of a word and cut there. For example, if there's a p or a b sound, you can cut just before that. There is a vocal pause there, and that's a good place to cut, rather than just slavishly using a script and doing it that way. So all sorts of little tips that I assimilated and was able to give to other people who came along and did it afterwards. After tape editing unit, I went to film unit at Maid of Hale. And that was the unit which in those days was producing Movie Go Round. I was there because of my previous projection experience with Ranks, as you remember, before the BBC, and also my tape editing experience and my mixing experience. So all those things came together in the film unit at Maid of Hale, run by a wonderful gentleman called Bob Windsor, a moustached, rather military-looking gentleman. And he was the sort of person who liked you or hated you, but he seemed to like me all right, so I got on quite well there. He was quite a formidable character. And then finally in radio, I went to become a studio manager. I became a studio manager, and that was back at Broadcasting House for most of the time. The studio managers, of course, operate in the individual radio studios in Broadcasting House. Did have a spell at Bush House, only 6 weeks, something like that. They were wonderfully friendly at Bush House, the studio managers there, possibly because they could speak to each other in English, and all these other languages were sort of coming out of everywhere else in all the studios. But what we did have to do, we had to have voice assessments. With a voice like mine, I certainly wasn't going to be somebody who was considered suitable enough to read news broadcasts or whatever. But we had a senior studio manager, as far as I remember. We went into a studio and he or she assessed our voice quality through reading a short news broadcast, just locally. And you were assessed A, B, C or D in terms of quality. An A person, an A studio manager, would be able to read the news, 10-minute news or whatever, in English, obviously. These were all in English, just short news bulletins. And then there were two varying degrees of mediocrity, which were a B and C. And then there were the D people. Now, the D people were considered to be so awful in front of the microphone, they weren't allowed to say anything on the air. They weren't even allowed to introduce the identifications between programs or anything like that. And they had to take around with them a quarter-inch tape with some recordings made by the people in Group A to give the announcements out. So they had to play these recordings rather than make announcements themselves. Well, I wasn't in that category either, so I must have been B or C. I was probably C with my my voice. But so I could do the announcements between the programs, but that was all.
Now, there was probably an apocryphal story that because Bush House was a sort of poor relation, Broadcasting House recorded everything at 15 inches a second, and Bush was at 7.5. Is that true?
We certainly in Broadcasting House recorded basically at 15. That is true. That's where I was mostly. And as far as I remember from my short period in Bush House, I think we did record at 7.5. So I guess you're probably right, David.
Poor relations, yes. Did you do any drama?
No, I didn't. I wasn't into drama at that stage at all in radio. I was mostly doing talks programs and things like that. I didn't do drama or music, although I'd like to have done music. But music, mostly the studio managers were working in the outside studios, not in Broadcasting House itself. And those studios were the ones that were kitted out to do the big orchestral and bands and all the rest of it. Places like Maid of Hale and the Paris in Regent Street and Aeolian Hall and those.
I think it was Studio One at Maida Vale where the symphony orchestra was. It was quite large, and you had to have an audience as well.
That was their base, the symphony orchestra. Yes, that's right. But then they had, I think, 6 studios in Maida Vale altogether, and they sort of, each number meant that they were slightly smaller. So by the time you got to number 6, it was a sort of quite a small studio that could take a band. And that's about it.
Did the radiophonic workshop exist in those days?
Absolutely. We in Film Unit, going back to that, in Film Unit, we were alongside the radiophonic workshop, and Desmond Briscoe and his crowd there. I think you've had one of the, was it Paddy Kingsland, was it?
Yes, Paddy Kingsland we've had.
Yeah. He was one of the people there, Delia Derbyshire. And, of course, subsequently, in my field of television sound, I used a lot of the music that they produced in productions that I was working on. They were alongside us, and we used to often share coffees and things like that, and particularly I remember Dick Mills, who was my sort of generation there, and he had a lot to do with the composing of the Doctor Who music. You see, Maida Vale was originally a skating rink, and the body of the building was the studios, and especially Studio One, the main one. And round the balcony was where, what in BBC terms was the radiophonic workshop and film unit. We were in the balcony, but it was all, the middle part was of course all filled in, whereas originally it was an open area for the skating.
Oh, that's interesting, yes.
At about that time, when I was a studio manager, I was interested in other aspects of sound, and with great interest I read a quite well-known book by John Grierson on documentary filmmaking. Grierson was one of the fathers of documentary filmmaking, really, and he had a section in there about sound dubbing, and it showed a cue sheet. There was an illustration of a cue sheet there. I thought, ooh, this sounds interesting. And then in 1968, the television film studios put an attachment on the internal advertisements for BBC stuff, an attachment as an assistant dubbing mixer. And I applied for this because I thought, with my knowledge from the book that I'd read, this sounded rather an interesting thing. But it didn't quite work out to be an attachment, because when I had the board, the interview, and went through it, and they took me on, but they took me on as an actual assistant dubbing mixer. And I remember saying to them, if I don't like it for any reason, would you mind if I came back to be a studio manager in radio? And they said, oh, yes, that's perfectly all right, that's perfectly all right. But of course I never did. I liked it so much that I stayed over in television. And with that, Ealing Film Studios became my base. Although I was working, first of all, I went to Alexandra Palace. Here's the connection with what my father showed me about the mast at Alexandra Palace earlier, back in 1949. I worked actually in that building, and it was the place where the news came from. So news dubbing took place in the rather primitive, by today's standards or by modern standards, dubbing theatre there. It was a non-rollback dubbing theatre. In other words, if you made a mistake, you had to go back to the beginning and start all over again.
Pre-rock and roll days, yes.
Pre-rock and roll, that's right, pre-rock and roll. It was driven by what's called a Celsin system, which locked all the various magnetic transports together and the picture, and rolled them all forward, but it wouldn't roll them back. So you had to keep going, or build up a number of premixes if it was a really difficult sequence. And we had 6 turntables there, and spot effects, and most of the stuff that the camera people on location generated for news, there was no sound available for it. So only interviews really were being recorded, sync. And so I had to, as an assistant mixer, spin the discs in. I had literally, I think it was 10,000 sound effects instantly available, and I could spin any of those in on these 6 turntables, and we had spot effects which we made up ourselves, things like cardinal slams and loops of various sounds, and then the mixer himself would mix these various things in, but I would have to generate all these as a combined source off the 6 turntables. At Alexandra Palace, there was a spin-off programme called Made in Britain at that time. It's a 10-minute series of programmes, I think probably 1 or 2 a week. Unlike the news items, which were generally 3 minutes, 4 minutes long, it was quite a difficult job to do on occasions because so many sound effects were missing from this 10-minute film. I can particularly remember one about the little aeroplane called the Islander, which I think they used to go between islands in Scotland. And it was all about the manufacturing and the use of this plane. And so I had planes taking off, landing, in-flight sounds, and all those had to come off my turntables. And the turntables were grouped 2, 2, 2. So there were 6 altogether, but they were in pairs. And sometimes, because there were rotary faders in those days, it was quite difficult to knock sounds out and bring others in at the same time. I've been known to use a foot, in fact, on a distant turntable to knock a sound out when I'm bringing sounds in on the other turntables. So it was quite a complex business, as there was no rollback system at all there.
Yes, so you couldn't lay those tracks then. You couldn't record a door slam or a plane taking off and lay it in. You presumably didn't have time.
There wasn't the time, and the editor didn't do that. The editor once again provided anything that was recorded in sync on location, but a lot of this was library footage which hadn't got location sound on it. And so we just had to spin the discs in.
That was very skilled.
It certainly made, well, there were 2 things. It made you aware of the timing, because you use a footage counter in those days, a 35mm footage counter, which a 35mm foot is 2/3 of a second, in fact. And you get used to that pace of the counter going over. In fact, you subdivide it in your mind to half feet as well. And this is a queuing mechanism. And the editor would provide a cue sheet with all the footages where transitions took place on the picture. But if there wasn't any pre-recorded sound there, you'd have to spin those in. Now, the other thing it did, as well as giving you a sense of rhythm, it would also mean that you have to memorise a lot of the discs, the disc library, especially the sounds that were always being used. Even some more remote ones, like sometimes you get Skylarks singing or something like that. Now, I remember that, 25415, I think it was. You remember the numbers. And I actually got to the stage in those days where I could look at a picture and numbers of the discs, where the effects can be found, would come into my mind without me actually knowing what the disc itself said. And I'd know that it was a certain band on that number, and then I could spin it straight away and in. And you have to do it fast.
Those were for your frequently used sound effects, but you said you had thousands of discs available, but they weren't available in the dubbing suite, presumably.
They were. A lot of them were.
They?
The whole library was, in fact, yes.
Really?
The whole 7-inch, 33 RPM discs were all available in each dubbing theatre, yes.
Gosh.
And at that time we had the Alexandra Palace dubbing theatre I've been speaking about. We had 2 dubbing theatres in Ealing, film studios. We had 1 at Lime Grove, but there was another one, but that disappeared. That Lime Grove changed around quite a bit. And we had 2 at the Television Centre. And each of those theatres would all have the whole library of discs, plus a lot of natural history ones, such as the one I just mentioned, the Skylark.
Gosh, all that duplication.
Yeah, but it's for speed, really. You couldn't go about ordering up discs or something. When you want to know, you want to get a disc on straight away. You'll see some of the later programmes I worked on where producers, artists, they suddenly say, "Oh, can we have so-and-so?" And you go to the library of discs behind you, put it out, zap it on the turntable, run it, and it's fast. That's
how
it
was
has
it
to be done.
catalogued then? How could you find things so quickly?
It wasn't catalogued in a very helpful way. The numbers were basically random with variations on the themes. So, for example, car engines or something like that. You'd have a particular car would have a number, and then it would have all the various things the car was doing, but they would just be that number followed by an A, B, C or D on different discs. But the numbers were pretty random. but I could remember numbers all right, so it didn't worry me that at all.
So you memorised effectively where a lot of this stuff was in the library there.
Yes, you'd start off. Little trick we had was to get an address book, and you put in your new address book, a blank address book. You put in your favourite discs, if you like, but put them in alphabetically. So if it was what should we say, a dog bark, it would be under D, wouldn't it? So you put it in the D on your address book. Then you could flick through there and find the number quickly. But I found I didn't really use that very much because I could just remember the numbers anyway.
When did proper rock and roll dubbing come in?
It was coming in the other theatres, in the television theatres at that time. Ealing was still Celsin locked, so non-rock and roll, as was Alexandra Palace. But at Television Centre we had a different sort of synchronisation system called Rhythmostart, and that enabled you, in fact, to roll everything back if you made a mistake. But it was a bit cumbersome because you had to stop the machinery. The big generator would have to run up to speed. It runs up to speed in order to make you stop. It locks everything together. Then you'd have to roll it back, and then it ran up to speed, and then you'd have to roll it forward again. And then just before you've made the mistake or you wanted to try something different, you could punch the recorder back into record. And that was the early sort of system of doing it. Of course, it's these days, it's even that is very old-fashioned. But it was light years in advance of the Celsin system, where you just had to keep trying it until you got it right, basically. And if you didn't get it right, you just accept it.
When you had to go back and start again, was that usually because of a commentator getting a commentary wrong, or was it normally because the sound effect had gone slightly in the wrong place?
Well, it could be a multitude of things. It could be because if you're recording a commentary, it certainly could be because you want to pick up on a good commentary link. But mostly with commentaries, unless they were being done as live, they would be recorded wild and then edited in by the editor afterwards and placed into position. But so it's much more likely that you'd make a mixing error because, of course, there wasn't any automated mixing in those days. So you could maybe have the music a bit too high or the effects were in the wrong place or something like that. And you could alter it and then roll back and then roll forward and punch in just before the mistake was made with your new mix, and then mix onwards until you made the next mistake or wanted to try something different. It gave the flexibility of being able to...
Once you had the rock and roll system.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Presumably with news, you were often dubbing something very close to transmission time.
Yes, certainly. Very close. Sometimes it was so close that the programme was on the air and you were still dubbing the last item or something for the programme. Yes, it was quite hairy stuff actually in news. The editing took place across in the old concert hall, I think it was, at Alexandra Palace, that they'd kitted out with various editing rooms. And they'd come rushing across at speed into the dubbing theatre and say, right, here we go. And they slap down the cue sheet for the mixer and they give you a list of things, give you a copy of the cue sheet with a list of things that would be required from grams. And then you stick all the discs on and you'd be running. I mean, the mixer would give the instruction to run as soon as it was laced virtually, and you'd be into it. And then out of it, of course. If you made any mistakes, well, so they just went out, I guess. It's quite difficult sometimes to sync things exactly. I can remember on one occasion there was a car door slam. I don't know why I remember this. I had to put it in at 207.5 feet in, and I won't mention the mixing question, but I think he swore at me because I took about 4 attempts to get it exactly right. And this was doing it on the fly, of course, in my earlier days.
A little bit more about Alexandra Palace. I mean, forget the sound studios and things. What was the place like?
There were 2 new studios, the old Studio A and Studio B, the ones that were being used by the original pioneers, of course, Baird and the Marconi systems in the two studios. But those two studios were repurposed and used for the two news studios. Quite often, the national news would come from one and the local southeast news would come from the other. And then on our side of things, in order to stop the soundtracks getting mixed up, all the stuff that we recorded in the dubbing suite for the southeast news, we'd record the sound on 35mm stock, whereas the national news would be on 16mm stock, even if the picture in both cases was on 16mm, of course. There are all sorts of little quirks like that.
That was to avoid confusion, presumably.
Yes. Yeah. There was a club there, of course, at Alexandra Palace, so people can go and relax there. There was I think that was the old transmitter hall in the old days. So yes, it was quite a nice, friendly atmosphere.
Yes, and I think later on, the Open University went in instead.
The Open University did in fact go to Alexandra Palace until they eventually decamped to Milton Keynes. But news went to Television Centre, I think.
So Lime Grove was just current affairs?
Yeah, I think Lime Grove was definitely current affairs because I worked there on Panorama and such like many times. Anyway, in 1969, I was given the opportunity to join Alan Dykes, who was one of our senior mixers and probably one of the best mixers at Television Centre in Dubbing Theatre Y. And this was the start of a team of the two of us for 5 years. I stayed for 5 years with Alan, working on all sorts of prestige programmes and quality programmes that he seemed to attract. And of course a lot of this hopefully brushed off onto me. I was his main assistant for all those years. And this gave me a marvellous background and knowledge of a lot of people on the production side as well. So I took on many of the documentaries and children's programmes, light entertainment programmes, as an acting dubbing mixer. And also Alan was giving up smoking at that time, and he decided he was a 40 a day man or something. I never smoked, so it didn't concern me much, but he was so grumpy when he was he couldn't concentrate on doing the work at all, so he spent a month sitting around in the back room there in the Dubbing Theatre Y where we were, and I was doing all the mixing at that time, which gave me even more experience of doing it. After that, I had a short spell at Lime Grove as an assistant mixer, and then I was promoted in 1976 to full dubbing mixer, which I felt was a great honour because there hadn't been a promotion to such a position for about 8 years, and I was lucky enough to be the chosen one on that occasion. I had, as you know, had a lot of experience in various sound places and sound posts compared with others, but there were others there with me or in my section who had been longer in film department than I had. So anyway, I enjoyed the work so much, and I was lucky on the day and got the job, and so I moved on, and I was one of a dozen, therefore, of the full dubbing mixers at the Television Centre, Ealing Film Studios, Lime Grove Studios. Oh, by the way, dubbing mixer in American terms is called a re-recording mixer, which actually is probably a more accurate description of what we do, because we're re-recording material onto another recording machine. So they call them re-recording mixers, we're dubbing mixers. So dubbing doesn't just mean, as the public often think, that we're people who put foreign voices on or translate foreign voices into English or something. That's just one aspect of dubbing, but it's a very small one. I think a better term is probably a sound designer for film and video.
Yes, no, I remember dubbing sessions in most of those places. The biggest ones were at Ealing, weren't they?
We had two dubbing theatres at Ealing. I worked in Theatre B, but that was a long time after the original equipment was taken out, and we had a wonderful Neve desk there. And the theatre itself was huge. It was a big barn of a place, but it was marvellous for the dramas that I was later to be mixing, and I mixed a lot of my drama series there. The large studio was particularly useful for building a sound booth there, in order to give an outside acoustic for revoicing when something went wrong on location. So if, say, a plane went over and it was a period drama, you couldn't have that soundtrack going. And
No.
so the artist would come in and we'd build an acoustic booth where the sound was very dead, and the artist would be asked to repeat their lines, often listening to a guide track from the location on headphones to get their pacing right, and also using cue lines going across the screen, or cue lights sometimes as well. And they would revoice in sections the part that had been obliterated by the plane on location. And so that was a very useful facility to have in that studio. We also had different surfaces there for doing footstep sounds, so we could this is part of the work of the assistant mixer, which I used to enjoy doing actually. That was doing synchronous footstep sounds. So you'd have concrete, and you'd have wood, and you'd have gravel, maybe you'd have straw, that sort of thing. Straw actually was 1/4-inch tape, all crumpled up on the floor. But it was, you could do all these different footstep sounds and record those and then place them in sync onto the drama.
Tell us about the Foley artist.
Well, that really is the Foley artist.
That is the Foley artist.
That's
Right.
what the outside industry calls it, David. They call them the Foley artists, but in the BBC it's assistant dubbing mixer's job to do that.
Right. Okay.
And but sometimes we did get special people to come in, and there were Foley artists by profession. If it was a particularly difficult one, the production team would maybe ask for a Foley artist to attend the session. I can remember there was one. There was a Foley artist that was called Beryl the Boot. We called her Beryl the Boot because she used to come in with a suitcase full of boots and shoes. She could put all these on to make different footstep sounds. But there was a notable occasion when she did the footstep sounds for 3 characters walking down a street, but one of them was a child, and the child was bouncing a plastic football as they walked along. And she did 2 of the footsteps to start with, and then she did the child feet and the football exactly in sync afterwards, so that we put the 2 together, and you got the 3 people walking down with the football being bounced. She was absolutely incredible. The main thing we wanted from location was the voice. If we get a good voice track, well-recorded voice track, that was the main thing. Anything else, really, in terms of effects, we could put on.
Now, you were presumably dealing with some quite high-end dramas in those days.
In 1977, I was a founder member of the Institute of Professional Sound. That's an organisation we started. It involved sound supervisors, anybody to do with sound from a professional point of view. That included studio managers and people like that. And that is still going. It was actually called the Institute of Broadcast Sound in those days, but that is sometimes called IBS. It's termed the IBS, and of course that has a medical association, I think.
Yes.
And so they changed it to Institute of Professional Sound. That was quite a bit later, and also later on they awarded me an honorary life membership because I was one of the founder members and did so much for sound. I was actually, at that time, involved in many programmes that were of a drama type. And I started off with Target. Now, Target with Patrick Mower in it, people don't generally remember that series very much, but it was quite a bloodthirsty series with lots of stunt sequences. And I got a call one day, and I was just doing ordinary documentaries and so on, up to that point. And the call was that the dubbing mixer in question was going to go off sick for 2 days. And I can see why now, because when Target came in, which is the programme he was supposed to be doing, and I offered to do it, it had, can you believe, 38 soundtracks on it.
Good grief.
38 soundtracks. Most of these were in the stunt sequences, of which there were many. I took a deep breath before doing it, but I tell you what, it was jumping in at the deep end. I felt I could do almost anything else after that. It was an amazing amazing opportunity for me to have.
So you could run all those tracks at once?
No, we couldn't do that, David. No, and we were talking mono tracks, of course, in those days as well. No, we could run probably seven or eight maybe, but you always had to have one transport available for recording on, and then you just build up in premixes. So
yes.
I think the editor had been a little over zealous, shall we say, because, for example, I remember a sequence of this car coming around the corner and went into a brick wall, but before it did that, it bumped up a curb, and each bump of the four wheels was laid on a separate soundtrack. So you went boop, 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 as the tyres hit the curb, and then it smashed into the wall, and all the bricks came down, and all people shouting, and all this sort of thing. So you can see how all the effects in a stunt sequence do build up. And you have to premix it down until you get to maybe 3 or 4 maybe premixes, and then work with those and rebalance those until you get the final result.
All the sound was on separate magnetic track, film material. So presumably it was rather high quality recording if you recorded a lot of times and you had to dub one onto the other. Presumably the quality stayed reasonably high.
That's right, yes. We tried to keep the quality high as far as we could. On music programs, for example, we actually involved Dolby as well, and we used Dolby to make things even better. But certainly on dramas, yes, it was all analogue, of course, so there will be some loss of quality each time you go through a copying stage, as you know, with analogue.
That's what I meant, yes, exactly.
But we kept the quality pretty high, using a pretty high signal to noise ratio and what have you. Target, in fact, was just a starter because it took me on to Shoestring with Trevor Eve, and it was based on an early local radio station called Radio West. Of course, local radio stations are familiar to us now, but in those days, in 1978 or so, they weren't. And now we did 2 series of Shoestring, and Trevor was a delight to work with to start with, but at the end of the second series, he didn't really want to know us on the technical side. He was very snooty, prima donna-ish, unfortunately. But had that not happened, I was actually asked if I could do a feature film, a Shoestring feature film, and I was provisionally penciled in to mix it. But that never happened because he pushed off and went onto the stage. He had a stage item called Children of a Lesser God, I think it was, that he went to. I did the whole of the 2 series, that's 21 programmes or so, of Shoestring, and it was quite well received, and moved on again, led on to Bergerac with John Nettles. What a lovely man. John was absolutely wonderful all the way through, such a lovely chap to work with. He came in from time to time, obviously, to do revoicing, so I didn't work with him on location because that's not my job. But he was a delight to work with, as the whole series was. We did 10 series of Bergerac altogether, and I worked out the way it should all, the same as Shoestring, the way the sound should all be manipulated and worked. Going back to Shoestring, of course, the output of Radio West was to be heard in lots of different locations. When Trevor Eve, when he was in the studio, the studio in Radio West, I'd have sort of spill coming over his headphones, so very thin sort of sound, or it could be big sound coming out of the loudspeakers, or it could be he might be in his car, on his car radio. You'd have to hear the sounds of Radio West, so it'd have to be distorted accordingly. So each sort of distort path was set up, about 5 or so different distort paths. With Bergerac, it was a little bit like that, but not quite so much. But we did have lots of changes of location. This was all masterminded by Robert Banks Stewart, was the overall producer, Scotsman, very nice man. Again, somebody who likes you or doesn't, and he fortunately liked me all right, so we got on really well. He kept the same team going right the way through that. As I say, 10 series. I mixed the first 6 series, but I just did the long Christmas specials after that for the following 4 or whatever it was, because I've moved on to Miss Marple with Joan Hickson, by that time, and it was virtually the same production team coming through from Shoestring to Bergerac to Miss Marple. The editing teams were largely the same. Robert Banks Stewart was involved, but then George Galaccio took over the producing position of Miss Marple, and Joan Hickson, I think everybody realises and recognises, is probably about the best Miss Marple there can be. She's absolutely wonderful. She was 83 years old when I was working with her, or at least the start of when I was working. Yeah, she was quite a lady then. And I said to George Galaccio one day, I said, how is it that Joan Hickson is chosen to be Miss Marple? She seems so ideal. Oh, he said, that's easy to say. The reason for that is that Agatha Christie, the author, was in a theatre and watching a play in which Joan Hickson was appearing. And after the production, he said, Agatha Christie went round behind the stage and met Joan Hickson and said, you're the person I want to be my Miss Marple, if ever it can be. So that's how Agatha Christie actually chose Joan Hickson to be Miss Marple.
That's a very good story.
I just wanted to say that the camera work on Miss Marple was such that it all was 1940s in looks. It was all browns and that sort of thing. But on the sound side, I also had to think of it being 1940s. And things like, for example, if a radio set was switched on, it would come on fairly quickly. But if you switched a radio set off in those days, it would gradually fade out as the valves cooled down in the old 1940s radios. So I would have to do a gradual fade out of whatever is on, and a little pop at the end, because the loudspeaker used to pop like that. All things like that. If you were working on something that is depicting decades ago, you have to sort of live in that time. And it's a good job I did live in that time, I suppose, and could remember the things that happened in order to be able to do that.
We're still in the, late 70s?
Yes, late 70s and early 80s, I suppose. I worked on quite a lot of other programmes. I did actually I was very fortunate collecting 3 BAFTA nominations. One was for Threads, which is a documentary drama directed by Mick Jackson, who later went to Hollywood. And I mixed a number of programmes for him. It was about a fictitious nuclear holocaust in Sheffield, based on Sheffield.
All I can remember is The War Game, which was much earlier.
That was earlier, and Threads was the next one, actually. It was put out at the same time. The War Game was put out at the same time as Threads, I believe. So that would have been about 1985 or so.
But the War Game never got transmitted.
But it did in the end, I think, didn't it?
Oh, I think in the end, yes. But when the original version didn't, because that was about 1960.
That was Peter Watkin, was it?
They put it out at as a cinema release, because I saw it in Slough, of all places, and that's because it wasn't going to be televised. But I think they did put it out later. So perhaps this thing went out at the same time as that.
I think Threads went out to be followed by War Game afterwards, or it was put out around the same time, yes. But Threads was very memorable from my point of view. I was disappointed, as Mick Jackson was, the director, that I didn't actually get the BAFTA for the sound on Threads, because it was remarkable. There will never be another Threads. It was just the most amazing programme. It, from the complexity point of view of the sound, when you can imagine all these buildings exploding and all the things that happened in it, you have to see the film. The interesting thing was we spent, I think, 3 days or so mixing the final version of it, and in the first half, of course, the whole world gets annihilated, virtually, with this terrible nuclear holocaust. Then the last part of the film is how gradually society gets itself back together again. Not completely, but it's all the traumas that they go through. It's a very, very harrowing film, actually. But it's amazing. It'll never be done again. Threads, well, you can find it on IMDb. It's definitely there anyway. But this is the thing. During the middle of the mixing of that, I think the middle night, actually, we had to work right the way through the night in order to make deadlines, as I recall, for NHK in Japan, the Japanese Broadcasting Authority, I think they were putting it out as one of the marks after Hiroshima or something like that. So what would that be? Probably 50 years from Hiroshima. They were putting it out. Anyway, we came out about 3 o'clock in the morning in the Ealing Film Studios. I was mixing it in Theatre B, the big theatre I was talking about earlier. And we came out and shut everything down, opened the door, and Ealing Film Studios, the dubbing theatre, is situated right next to Walpole Park in Ealing, which of course was closed and dark. It was in the middle of the night. And we came out, shut the door, and we just annihilated the world, but the world was still carrying on. I could hear rabbits and things running around in the park, just alongside the studio. It seemed the contrast of what we'd done on film and the reality of the peace of the night as we walked home after the session was just amazing.
Very poignant, yes, absolutely.
I had another nomination for Around the World in 80 Days, the Michael Palin series. It was programme 1, which was wonderful to work on. Michael Palin's a lovely man to work with. I had previously worked with him on, believe it or not, Monty Python. Come to that in a minute, maybe. Programme 1 is certainly good, Around the World in 80 Days. There was a sequence that occurs to me there where Michael was trying to find a cabin that he was going to occupy down in the bowels of this ship. And he was opening the doors to see which was his cabin, you see. And then he opened one of the doors and then shut it again quickly, you see, and then walked on because he hadn't found the right one. I said, what we need to do there is put a girl's scream on. Which is exactly what happened. I got the production secretary to go into the studio and do a loud scream of horror as this door opens, this man walks in, you see. And that's on there now. If you listen to that, it's, I think, 37 minutes in or something on programme 1. But that's just one incident. In dubbing, we can add so much to films, but by thinking of things that maybe the production team would be somewhat closer to it probably than we have. They hadn't actually thought of it, and we can think of these things and try and help them in making it even better. Sometimes we had to do as live sports broadcasts with people like Harry Carpenter. He got very annoyed if you stopped him. I tell you another person who got very annoyed if you stopped them mid-commentary, and that was Patrick Moore. Oh, he'd fly off the deep end, he would. You wouldn't dare stop him. If he said the word wrong or anything, you just let it go and then talk to him at the end about it. Never stop him. But everybody's different. We all, I suppose they like their flow and all the rest of it. Everybody's different. And most people were really nice and cooperative.
Now, let me ask you a question. I've been very aware of watching, old BBC programmes, like, for example, the Alec Guinness Smiley things and things like that. Just how detailed the sound is and how much the sound tells the story of what's going on, much more than you seem to get these days. Do you think that's true?
I think it is. I think it's true of the days of which you're speaking as well. One thing, this is a personal view now, but I'm very worried by the ubiquitous use of music in so many programmes these days. It seems as if modern producers and directors want to string along music under everything, more or less, except pieces to camera. So if you have a documentary, as soon as it goes into voiceover or commentary, they have to put music in there, but they don't. Well, why don't they just use effects or just let it... I used to have, when I was doing talks to producers, I used to have a video clip, 3.5 minutes long, had Paul McCartney in it, actually, and it was a little mini documentary, if you like, and I had 3 different forms of music: sad music, happy music, joy, I don't know, different music, anyway. And I could prove to the producers that you can change the whole feeling of the thing because of the power of music. It is so powerful, and using the different examples, you could make this short clip mean completely different things, really. And the producers could see by the demonstration how important music is. But I think all that's lost these days. I think modern directors, producers, they seem to want, perhaps young people just want music all the time. It's not actually what I would call music either. A lot of it is repeating phrases on the piano and things, jangling along in the background. Ding-a-ding-a-ding, ding-a-ding-a-ding, ding-a-ding-a-ding. The same sort of sound, repeating all the time. It's meaningless. It doesn't do anything. It just gets in the way. And as you say, when you get older, you can't hear the dialogue so well.
Right. Gripes over.
Well, it's not only gripes, because it was actually trying to school and educate the producers and directors in the use of music, which is so important and something which I think should be dealt with more these days when they're being trained.
Let's go back to your career. Tell me more about you worked with Monty Python.
Yeah, okay, Monty Python. I worked with them, yes. It was not a big booking from our point of view because there were inserts for their programme, as a lot of light entertainment jobs were. We tended to get them because they've been working on location in the daytime. These sorts of teams, like some mothers do have them and things like that. They'd be on location in the daytime, so they come into the dubbing theatre in the evening and do their bit, and they were just sequences. So with Monty Python, yes, the whole group would come in. Quite a rabble they were. John Cleese would be towering above everybody and lording it over everybody. Michael Palin as nice as ever. But the chap I really worked with was Terry Gilliam, who was the American guy who did the cartoons and the captions.
Yes.
And of course they were mute, obviously. So he came to me for sound effects. And it would be, we'd build up the sound effects to go with his cartoons on the fly, really. I'd have half a dozen turntables, tape machines, spot effects and things like that. And he'd say, I'd like a bit of sound to go with that, to make it, to pick it. And I'd say, well, what about this? And I'd just pluck a disc out from my bank of discs behind and play. I said, what about like that? Shall we play it slow? Yes, we'll play it slow. How about backwards? Yes, we'll turn it backwards. So we'll do it by hand, wind it backwards and make it go. And the whole thing was built up like this. All these sequences, and I really enjoy working with them. Actually, it's really seat of the pants stuff, but light entertainment.
It's very, very imaginative.
Yes. Documentaries. I worked on a whole range of documentaries in my time. I worked at everything from the very final Magic Roundabout up to the Queen's Christmas broadcast. So I've mixed everything between those two, if you like. And that included many horizons, because I always like technology and technical programs. We did, I remember in 1982, with Alec Nisbet, there was Horizon. He came in, he said, I've got this rather special one to do. So I said, oh yes, what's it called? He said, it's something called AIDS. It's about... Nobody had ever heard of AIDS before. I said, what's AIDS? So he explained what it was. I said, I see what you mean. And we did that around in 1982, and that hopefully opened the eyes of many people to AIDS and all that it implied, I worked on Tomorrow's World, of course, many Tomorrow's Worlds, with lovely people like Raymond Baxter and Judith Hann and Michael Rodd and all those. Panoramas. Worked with a certain Boris Johnson on Panorama.
Really?
Yes. He came in, I was mixing in Lime Grove at that time. Suddenly the door burst open as we were about to start the commentator, I think could have been David Dimbleby, I'm not sure. But the commentator was in his box in the studio. I was sitting at the mixing console. And in blusters this fellow and sat down alongside me. And he was going all the time, So I thought, well, and I inquired. I said, I asked the senior producer. I said, who's this chap? Boris Johnson. So I said, I thought he was a journalist. So they said he is. He's come in just to be a producer on this program. Anyway, we sort of bumbled on and got the commentary done. And then, of course, he was sitting with me for the rest of the mix and so on. And by the end of the day, I really respected that man. To start with, I thought, what a bumbling fool. But at the end of the day, I was full of respect for him.
He was asking intelligent questions.
Indeed. He was a very intelligent man. A shame what happened afterwards.
That's
there we
very
are.
interesting. Yeah, extraordinary.
The holiday programme, I used to work on the holiday programme. That was Cliff Mitchell-Moore and John Carter, the wonderful Anne Gregg. I really liked Anne Gregg. She was from Northern Ireland originally, but she was one of the people presenting in those days, and such a lovely lady. Sadly no longer with us. Lost of the Summer Wine, I worked on a few episodes of that. Now that was a bit special because obviously it was shot on location in Holmfirth, is it? Holmfirth, isn't it? In Yorkshire. It comes to us with the producer, director, Alan J.W. Bell, he calls himself, and he comes in, but he's previously shown it to an audience. So as well as having all the normal soundtracks to mix, I had an audience track as well. And so I can up and down the audience according to whatever level I wanted, which was wonderful to have it all on tap like that. It's like doing a live programme, except it's out in the middle of the Dales. You see, with Summer Wine, it was all location stuff, and that's what made it special. There was another one of those, and that was the Generation Game. I did. You think the Generation Game always came from the studio, but it didn't. We did just one off from I think it was Scarborough. I had all the usual sounds coming in, and the people, and you had the conveyor belt with the parcels on it, or the gifts on it, or what do you call it? And I played in the music when it went along and all that. But it was on location, but it was all mixed by me in the studio, in the dubbing theatre.
And that was just a one-off, was it?
That was a one-off, yeah. There was another one-off with Perry Como's show, produced by Yvonne Littlewood. And that was a one-off as well. Very enjoyable to work on, though. I like doing the odd music programmes as well, like that. There was a police series called Law and Order that I worked on, and that was interesting from my point of view because we were having refurbishment of our Ealing dubbing suite, and so there were 4 parts to this, and I mixed 2 of them outside in an outside theatre, which I dry hired.
What were the outside dubbing theatres like compared with
well,
BBC
the main difference, David, is that the outside theatres in those days and the inside dubbing theatres had the faders working the opposite way round. In the BBC terms, the linear faders, you push them away from you in order to have no sound coming out, and you bring them towards you to increase the sound. But conventionally, in all outside theatres, music recording studios and so on, you push for more sound. In other words, if the faders are towards you, there's 0 sound. And if you push them up and away from you, you get more sound. So the problem is when you've got sound coming out of a channel and your fader is halfway between the two, do you go that way or this way to make more sound if you want it a bit louder? And it makes you think. So that was my main problem, to overcome that rather simple human side of things.
Why on earth did the BBC go the other way? Or why did the other people not follow the BBC's procedure?
I think the outside industry went their own way. They decided that push for more sound was more logical. But the reason the BBC went for the pull for more sound was because the BBC is working on transmission in most of their studios, unlike dubbing theatres, in most of their studios. And if you imagine having a row of all these faders with the knobs, if you like, of the faders being away from you, there's little chance you can accidentally knock a closed fader open, which might have line-up tone on it or something like that, and that would go on transmission. If you think about it, if you're crouching over the faders, you might, with your cuff, knock one open. If your 0 sound level was towards you, you might knock it open. I think that was the reason I was given, anyway, that the BBC opted for having that modus operandi. But and why should the outside industry follow the BBC necessarily, anyway?
Well, only because the BBC used to train for the industry, so I don't know whether that included dubbing mixers. But
well, I think probably it did to some extent. A number of dubbing mixers did go outside. I was given opportunities myself to go outside a number of times, but I declined them because I wanted the security of the BBC, which you'll see later on wasn't quite so forthcoming. Anyway, while we were in the environment of the dubbing theatre, can I just mention the smoking policy? When I was doing most of these programmes, there wasn't a smoking ban in the studios. And my own private policy was, as a non-smoker, that I didn't want twitched up producers. I know you were a producer.
But I never smoked.
Oh, you never smoked? Well, you're okay. You're exempt then. But I didn't want people who were smokers sort of sitting, gnashing their teeth or something because they couldn't smoke. And so I allowed them to smoke in the domain of my mixing room. But the downside was, apart from my passive smoking, I suppose, which, who knows, I'm okay so far, but who knows. But the downside was, believe it or not, the mixing consoles have edge contacts on them. Now, these are gold-plated contacts within the modules that have to mate together in order to make the module work on the console. And we were finding increasingly, with the nicotine around in the air, it was forming a deposit on these contacts. And so our modules would be frequently going down.
Really?
And this has more or less gone away now because of the fact that smoking isn't allowed in the studios. Another interesting thing, I did quite a lot of royal broadcasts. I mentioned the fact that for 3 or 4 years I worked with Richard Corsten doing the Queen's Christmas broadcast, mixing that.
Tell us about that. That must be interesting, particularly with the offcuts. If you've got
well,
any
I didn't see many of the offcuts, to be honest.
Quite.
But Her Madge did come in a few times to sort of see the final result, so we did see her.
Oh, really?
But it was shot on location, whatever that was, but mostly in Buckingham Palace, obviously. And then it would come for editing, and then after that they would have little glimpses. You can imagine the Queen's or the royal broadcast, little glimpses of what she'd been doing throughout her year, and they used library footage for that, or footage from earlier on, from the occasions when she was visiting abroad, for example. So all these things had to be mixed together, and so what would happen is the final mix, it's not a particularly complicated mix from my point of view, but Richard Corsten would come in with the editor and various others. All the doors would have to be locked in the theatre, Richard said. All the red lights must be on all the time, and nobody must say what's in the broadcast. It was that secret. And we produced a mag track, magnetic, 16mm film track, which was the tip of a pyramid, because once that was made by us, it went for copying. Umpteen copies were made all the way down the pyramid because all the various broadcasters wanted a copy of it in this country and abroad. But the main thing was that it was complete secrecy and nobody must know anything about it or what was said or anything. I worked on a number of royal broadcasts. Royal Heritage I worked on, that was way back, and that took me to Buckingham Palace because there was a reception given by the Queen and her equerry, people like that, whereby all the people involved in Royal Heritage were asked to go up to Buckingham Palace, which we did. So we drove in through the archway outside into the inner quadrangle there, and then we went up, we were escorted out of our cars, parked there, escorted up the stairs. It was Christmas time when we went, actually. There were footmen left and right up the stairs to the long gallery, and we congregated there, all of us. There's about 50 of us or so that were involved with the Royal Heritage series. Anyway, after perhaps a quarter of an hour or so, these big lofty floor-to-ceiling doors swung open, and then I saw the Queen and the Duke were just the other side of the door, you see. And that was the entrance to the music room, which is where she was going to be with us, where she was going to invite us. The music room overlooks the back of Buckingham Palace, the garden and everything. Anyway, so then the footman that was alongside, or maybe it was the equerry, I don't know who it was, or her private secretary, beckoned to me, as I had to be right next to the door, to come in, as the first to come in. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm a dummy mixer. I'm not the producer or director or anything. So I signalled to Dick Causton. I said, perhaps you better go in. So he went in first, and we all followed afterwards, and did our customary bow from the neck, as we met the Queen and the Duke. And then we just formed little huddles in the music room, and food was vol au vents and what have you, and wine and nothing. Days before one worried about drinking and driving, this all came round. We were little huddles of about 6 people maybe each, and the Queen came round to each of us and came to our little group of 6, and I said, have you seen the series, ma'am, Royal Heritage? And she said, I haven't actually seen it all. She said, I've missed some of them. So I said, well, you should get a video recorder, ma'am. They were just coming out at that time. And I just had my first one at home, actually. It was a Philips one, a very big one. I think we've got one of those somewhere, she said. So I said, but I think it's broken. So I thought, should I offer to come mend it? And I thought, no. So I said, I hope you soon get it mended, ma'am. And then you can see the rest of it. So that was quite a nice little interchange with Her Majesty. And then, as she was with us, the Duke came up, and he said to her, well, I'm sorry, dear. I noticed the word dear. I'm sorry, it seemed a bit odd. I'm sorry, dear, but I have another engagement, so I have to go now. Oh, okay, dear. So off the Duke goes, out somewhere, exit, left, stage left, leaving the Queen with us. But then she moved on to another group. And then after a while, the whole place went silent, and we realised that she was going to exit herself, which is what she did. And we all chatted for a little while, went down, inspected the loos with all their golden taps and cloth towels, of course. Anyway, we went down to the cars and drove out again, and that was the end of that. But it was an interesting insight as to what goes on in Buckingham Palace and how nice she is.
Yes, very memorable, yeah.
If you're interested, there's a one-off programme called The Story of Royal Broadcasting that I was involved in. And also, we used to do the obituaries, as is probably fairly well known. Obituaries can't be made in no time at all if somebody dies. So obituaries for the main royal people, like in those days it's the Queen Mother and the Queen, Duke of Edinburgh, and the various princes, those are pre-packaged, but they have to be updated. And I was in the process one weekend of updating the obituary for the Queen Mother. It's about an hour and a half long on 16mm film. And I was mixing it. What happens is when a new bit comes along, you chuck out an old bit so the overall length stays the same. So there's quite a bit of jiggery-pokery going on. But it was a 2-day booking, and I was in one dubbing theatre in one for the first part, and another dubbing theatre the following day, and it was a weekend. So I took the Queen Mother's obituary home in my car, stuck it under the bed overnight, and just hoped that she wouldn't die overnight, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to find it. Anyway, that's what has to happen.
That's a very good story, yes.
There are other programmes, notable programmes that I worked on, like Blue Peter, for example. A lot of us worked on Blue Peter, but I'm particularly homing in on John Noakes, a wonderful chap, lovely chap, and I'm sure you remember him, David.
Mm.
And you probably also remember his dog called Shep.
Yes.
Well, Shep used to come in with him, and whereas John used to go into the studio to have his voice recorded, Shep used to come into my control room, and he used to lie down underneath, on top of my feet, as I was mixing at the console. But there was one occasion when dear old John was a bit worked up and a bit late, and we had a 1-hour slot only it was the Thursday morning, it must have been, because that's when Blue Peter went out. So on this Thursday morning, we had a slot between 9:45 and 10:45 for Blue Peter, just to do a few little small things of commentary and one thing and another, as its transmission was that day. So a few little things had to be done. I think the following programme at 11:45 or probably 12 o'clock or so, was Man Alive. I used to do a lot of Man Alive programmes, and that was following. However, John was a bit late. Now, the producer, he was also called John. He came in to me, and then he said, well, I don't know where John's got. And then all of a sudden John came and shot straight into the studio. The production, John, said, I'm going to have a word with him about this because we haven't got much time left. So he goes into the studio, and perhaps I shouldn't have done, but I did switch the pre-fade on. And this almighty argument broke out between the two of them. And John Noakes said, I couldn't help being late, and this and the other John was saying, well, we've only got a short amount of time in here. You have to be more punctual in future. Oh, I can't do it. And John Noakes took his plastic coffee cup, BBC coffee cup, with sugary coffee in it, and flung it all around the studio. So it was all running down the walls. It was on the microphone. It was a state in the studio. It was a fairly full cup of coffee. And I thought, cool, I'm not having this, Anyway, we got on and did his commentary. And I said to the production, John, I said, look, I can't be having this. I've got another programme coming in a few minutes. They'll be wanting to do a commentary. And look at the state of the studio because of John doing that. So anyway, I said, we'll have to get health services to clear it up. So anyway, they all went off, and I thought, well, I will let this rest. So I rang up Billy Baxter, and I said, Billy, I don't like to complain about things, but in the dubbing theatre, I said, John Noakes has just, I told her what had happened. Oh, she said, well, he's a frontline chap, he's got all this tension because he's a star, and I said, look, Billy, it doesn't matter, that doesn't matter, don't come into it. Really, this studio is not in a fit state to present to our next programme. And so she thought, oh, well, I can't do anything with that. Oh, I said, all right, well, I'll get house services to do it. So anyway, didn't get much joy there. So I rang house services. Oh, no, I didn't at that point ring house services. I had to get on with the next programme. So Man Alive came in, and I was just starting the mix for Man Alive, and there was this noise of the buckets, coming along. There was somebody from house services. So I looked round, and would you believe it? It's John Noakes himself with a broom, a mop and a bucket, and he was going to clear it all up, he said. Oh, I said, John, that's really kind of you, but don't bother. I said, we'll get house services to do it. So what a nice man, though, to actually to come himself to the theatre and to try and rectify as best he could. I mean, the thought was there anyway, and that's the main thing.
Can I ask you a more technical question? 16 and 35 mil, presumably most of the things you were doing were done on 16 millimetre, but some things were important enough. I mean, Civilization was one of them, to have 35 mil. How much 35 did you see?
Mostly drama sequences. I can remember Z-Cars way back in Theatre A at Ealing, and that was non-rock and roll, of course, and it was that was shot on 35 mil, I think. I think in those days they tried best they could. That's black and white, of course. They tried to match the quality with the studio quality, so when they cut from one to the other, there wasn't that embarrassing disparity between the quality of the pictures.
It was very noticeable, wasn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. On 16 it was. Of course, with video these days, it's fine.
Now, what about the change to video? We should be coming on, presumably, in your timeline, to dubbing of video.
Yeah, certain programmes were the pathfinders, really, as far as that was concerned. Songs of Praise was one. Much of that was recorded in stereo on location in the churches, and came to me as a stereo for recording, for re-recording. And so we produced the stereo output. And in fact, Blue Peter, we've just been talking about Blue Peter. I mixed many Blue Peters in stereo. There are different forms of stereo, as you, I'm sure, are aware. There's AB, left-right stereo, but there's M&S stereo as well.
Mid and side, yeah.
Yeah, well, middle and side is, what some people call it. It's basically it's a mono mic, but it's got a figure of 8 mic equivalent, if you like, facing sideways. So it is middle and sides. And the middle signal, the advantage is the middle signal can be used as plain, straightforward, dumb old mono. Yes. But the side signals, or the S signal, is largely in anti-phase, and by having the meters that we have on the mixing console, you can see how much S signal there is, and it should never exceed the M signal. Otherwise you get a hole in the middle sort of feeling in the sound. But we're going technical now. And then you have your A and B red and green needles, which are the left and right, of course. Interestingly, red was always designated left and green was designated right. And somebody, I don't know how true this is, somebody said it's because the BBC is steeped in the service industry, especially the Navy. And of course, the Navy signalling, as you know, left on a warning light is red, and the starboard is green. And maybe that's what they said, that it was to do with the left and right and the naval origins of the parts of the BBC. But I don't know if that's true or not. So, yeah, stereo, I didn't deal with a huge amount, or I did mix the very first Bergerac that was ever mixed in stereo. It was called the Ice Maiden. It was Programme 5, Series 3, I think it was. And that was interesting, and it got all the bigwigs coming round to the Ealing studio to hear it in glorious stereo. When I finished mixing it, they invited everybody who was anybody in production to come round and listen to stereo, the drama in stereo. So that was quite interesting.
So all the dubbing theatres had to be slightly rebuilt?
No, not really to start with, David, because they used the existing mono consoles but strapped the faders together so that you had a plastic device, sort of insert, which went across the fader knobs, two adjacent ones, or maybe three if you need the three, and you move the two together. It was a bit unwieldy, that, though.
That sounds like a very British design.
These days, of course, when I'm doing my own films these days, of course, it's all done on the computer and it's all automatically stereo, so it's not a problem, really. But I was just going to mention one other thing, another humorous thing that happened when I was in Theatre Wyatt Television Centre. One day, I came back from lunch by myself, and outside my studio, there was this enormous parcel, enormous box. It must have been 3 feet tall, I should think, and by about 1 foot by about 3 feet, or 2 feet maybe. So it was quite a tall box. And it had my name on it, and I thought, what on earth is that? I couldn't imagine what it could be. I didn't know what the programme was in the afternoon. All I knew it was drama sequences. Anyway, I thought, well, I better find out. It's got my name on it, find out what... And I opened it up, and guess what was inside? Bongos. Floor-standing bongos. And I thought, what on earth do I want those for? And why to me? Anyway, it all became apparent when the production team came in. They said they wanted to build up a drama sequence of people chasing each other along roads on the film, and they wanted to go dabba 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 as the people were chasing each other. And I said, well, why me? Oh, we've heard you play drums. I said, well, yes, I do play drums, but not bongos. But I still did it.
How funny. Now, just to go back to a relatively an important thing. As far as I remember, you always had to check what the programme would sound like on an ordinary television with a small loudspeaker.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes.
By listening to the sound on a small loudspeaker in the dubbing theatre.
This was entirely a personal thing, but I had in the theatres where I worked, for most of the time, that was basically Ealing. I was in the Ealing Theatre B for 3 years, so I had the opportunity to have fixed up 2 small speakers. The thing is with sound, that if you play it on one set of speakers, even though they're small speakers, it still doesn't necessarily sound like everybody's television set at home. And furthermore, of course, more and more people were doing, as I do myself these days, listening in hi-fi at home anyway. But the balance does change, and the speech versus music balance does change considerably. And this is probably part of the reason why I find the music is so annoying on documentaries these days, because I'm listening in hi-fi conditions, whereas if you're listening on a smaller speaker, it would tend to emphasise the voice frequencies.
Now, we didn't explore this business of changing over from, well, presumably there's still some film dubbing, but basically it's all video now. I imagine nearly all video.
Yeah, well, I specialised in the video side of it. I went over to video as soon as I could because I could see that was the future.
Yes.
Theatre Y had another reincarnation, a television centre that is, on the first floor of the East Tower. And it became an all-video suite, which I was more than happy to man. It was also, because it was a desk that was a mixing console that was brought in from outside. In fact, I went down with at that time, the head of sound, to Bristol in order to acquire this desk because it was surplus to requirements of a company there, and the BBC bought it. We installed it, where I said, in the television centre, and it had all the faders, of course, the other way around on it, which is fine as far as I'm concerned. And it was wonderful to be able to see wonderfully clear pictures, and to be able to, to be able to get the synchronisation between all the various bits and pieces. I mean, you had quarter-inch tape machines striped with time code. I had a 24-track machine on track 24 it had time code, so I could lock them all together with the picture, and they would all run in sync. It was a funny story there, actually. One of my colleagues, who was only used to film dubbing, he came in one day, and I was just rattling back, and all the various devices, the quarter-inch, the 24-track, the video, they all go at their own speeds in reverse, and then they lock up, and then they roll forward and gradually jump into sync with the synchronizer. But when I was rolling back and they're all going this chap walked in, he said, I don't know how these things can all stay in sync. He was used to seeing sprocket holes, you see. Of course, there's no sprocket holes. It's all time code, which is invisible to the naked eye. And he was quite floored by that.
So, John, how did you come to leave the BBC, and did you go on working as a dubbing mixer after leaving?
Yes, I did, but the end of my time at the BBC after 31 years was rather ignominious. So we come to 1994, when I was offered voluntary redundancy at the age of 51. I don't know quite how to put this, really, but I was accused by a member of the allocations office of being off sick. And in fact, I had been off sick with a bad migraine, and I was in bed most of the day. But this chap jumped on me the following day as soon as I came in. He said, you've taken a day off when I told you couldn't. Anyway, developed into a bit of a row. I wasn't very happy at this point. 1994 was when John Burt had virtually sort of stifled all the nice feelings that we previously cooperative staff had in us. And I wasn't feeling very pro-BBC at that time, unfortunately. And I knew I'd been offered a voluntary redundancy at the end of that year, at the end of 1994, which after much thought I took. It was good because they, as you probably know, gave us quite a good golden handshake at the end. And as it was voluntary, that was fine. However, with this event that had just taken place, this chap said, you better go now. So I said, what, right now? In the middle of the day sort of thing? You don't want me here anymore? So he said, oh, you can come back at the end of the year to say goodbye. So I said, now, look here. I said, if you're sending me home now, he said, oh, you'll come back at the end of the year for us to say goodbye properly. So I said, well, no, if you're sending me home now, as of this moment, I said, I won't be back at all. You won't see me anymore. Because why should I, after 31 years, be dismissed like that? That's what I was being told. And I said to him, well, don't you even want me to do this afternoon's bookings? Oh, you've got bookings this afternoon, have you? So I said, yes, I have. Oh, well, I think you better stay for those. I said, well, you just told me to go. So he said, oh, well, I'd really like you to stay and do the afternoon bookings. He was obviously thinking you'd have to get somebody else in. So that's the way I ended. It was a very ignominious end. I used up some leave. I used up all the rest of my leave, and I never went back in. Actually, I did. I went in very late one night and collected my belongings, to be honest with you. But as far as they were concerned, I didn't go back at all.
That's a terrible story, yes.
Why would you? The only celebration of my leaving, other people had parties and things like that. I wasn't looking for a party particularly, but the only celebration was that the local producers in East Tower, where I was working, the local producers, editors and people all gathered round. We had some champagne and stuff and one thing and another. at the end of the day, because I still had to carry on and do the afternoon's bookings, as the man had told me. It was really bad. It was so badly done that, after all those years of good service, I hope.
That's a very depressing story.
Very depressing.
I'm surprised at that, really.
I don't know if I can put it any more subtly. I left the BBC, and the following week, I went to Phase 2 recording studios. I like to think of the term headhunted me. They asked me to go and join them because they were interested in BBC producers and directors who had, with Producer's Choice, had opted to work with me. They wanted to come and work with me wherever I was. So obviously Phase 2 wanted me to attract their business. So I worked on BBC programmes still. I did some for Channel 4, some for ITV. I even worked on DVDs, doing the voice tracks for DVDs and games and things like that, all sorts of things. But unfortunately, Phase 2 lasted only about 3 years, something like that, afterwards, because it had other business connections which caused it to go under. So I went freelance for a while then, and but I didn't like that much because I had to go around to different studios, mostly in Soho, around that area where all the recording studios were, get used to their equipment in their downtime, if they had any, before I could, get paying customers to come in. In fact,
Yes.
The very last programme I worked on was with dear old David Attenborough. Yeah, it was a programme about the Wildlife and Wetlands Trust in Slimbridge. But earlier on, I'd worked with David a number of times. Interestingly, we had a little chat about the way he pronounced something when he was doing a commentary. He was doing a thing about Hawaii, and he pronounced it Hawaii, like that. So I said, David, I don't think people are going to quite understand if you say Hawaii. Why are you saying it like that? Oh, he says, it's a word with a glottal stop in it. He said, oh yes, it's definitely got a glottal stop in it. Must be pronounced like that. So I said, well, I think you're going to lose some of the audience. They won't know what you're talking about. Anyway, we compromised. He's such a lovely chap, David, anyway. And we compromised, and he said something just between the two. So it was more or less Hawaii, but not quite.
Yes, he's got a wonderful voice.
Lovely, yeah. And I knew him, of course, when he was controller as well.
So that's a very long career, and with the exception of that last episode, your time at the BBC was very happy.
Well, it was. I'm from the days when the BBC looked after their staff, and we staff conscientiously looked after the BBC's interests and reputation. There are two reasons that I feel privileged to have worked for the BBC between 1964 and 1994. And the first of those is that in that era we made some wonderful classic programmes, the likes of which are not made any longer these days, it seems. And I had the privilege of working on those programmes. The second thing is technology. Technology has advanced tremendously in that period of time, right from quite crude equipment that we had in the 1960s up to the 1990s, when we had computer-assisted mixing consoles and all that entailed. In 2001, I decided to come away from the London area and the southeast, and my wife and I moved to a lovely village in South Dorset, and we have a gorgeous bungalow here with a large garden and pond in it and fish and things like that. But I still like making programmes, and so whilst I've been here, and bearing in mind that I like technical things and technology generally, I was trained to some extent in camera work, and I brushed up on that, and also on lighting, which I find is a bit boring but very important. But I really enjoy the post-production, so the sound and all that and the editing I really enjoy. So I produced a programme about, a long programme actually, it's about an hour long, about T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, and his final years here in Dorset. And that's now on YouTube, yes. And that was interviewing some people that he knew and all the places he went to, and Clouds Hill, of course, is one of his places owned by the National Trust. We visited there. I then moved on to one called The Traditional Crafts of Dorset, and I managed to contact 6 local craftsmen or women, and this is also on YouTube now. We had a thatcher, a Dorset button maker, a lady who used to make Dorset buttons for the film industry as well, a wood carver, a farrier, a hurdle maker, and a stonemason. And all those 6 are depicted in this documentary that I made on these traditional crafts of Dorset. And then there was one about the pubs of Wareham, past and present, where I live. My village is not very far from Wareham, and the gentleman in question, who knew all the pubs past and present, he did a book on it, and I said, oh, that would make a good film. So, although I'm not a drinker particularly, he was, and he took me round to all these places. There are 8 pubs still in Wareham. Wareham is, for those that don't know, near Corfe Castle, near Poole. It's that sort of area of South Dorset. There are 8 pubs still in existence, but there were 27 previous pubs that were here, and we visited the various premises that used to be pubs, and it's quite interesting and revealing. That's also on YouTube. Then 2 that are on Amazon Prime. I did one, this is the technical side again, called Echoes of the Past, and this was the evolution of radar in Dorset. Radar was produced in the early war years between 1940 and 1942 at another village called Wortham Travers, which is right on the coast near Swanage. And one of the engineers who worked there, but he's a scientist really, who worked there, he gave us a talk at one of the organisations I belong to. And I thought, oh, that'll make a good documentary. So I contacted him, and then it turned out there was an organisation called the Purbeck Radar Museum Trust in existence, and it was the chairman of that, a certain Dr. Phil Judkins, who contacted me. And Phil and I have been good friends ever since, because we made this documentary and went to all the places where the radar was being developed. Of course, a lot of the places these days are now just fields or buildings or farms and things like that, because nature has taken over much of it as well. But we have got archive material which we could look at, and he has lots of interesting stories. And the gentleman in question, Dr. Bill Penley, the gentleman in question who was the scientist there, he did some interesting pieces to camera right out on the headlands where the old establishments used to be. He was 90-something or other by that time, and he couldn't really remember the various things he was going to mention. So my good lady wife was to be seen on the ground with goofboards on the side, idiot boards, whatever you call them.
Yes, idiot boards.
So he could sort of see it. So his eye line wasn't ideal, shall we say. He's looking at poor chap. Unfortunately, he died at 99.8.
Oh no.
So a couple of years ago, no longer with us. And then the final one that I've done of note, also on Amazon Prime, is the story of the Royal Naval Cordite Factory, which was situated north of Wareham and had, believe it or not, 450 acres of land with about 2,000 people were there in the war, the First World War, during the wars, and after, and the Second World War, and a little bit after that. And it was the story of this place behind these tall iron gates which still exist surrounding this place, and the making of cordite, which incidentally isn't an explosive, it's a propellant, they tell me, and it was made for the naval guns for the Navy. So, and now, having done those, I'm getting a bit old in the tooth for humping camera equipment around on location, although I'm very happy to take on post-production duties.
Yes.
But I also now run and I'm the leader of the U3A Science and Technology Group with 140 members here in Purbeck. The U3A is the University of the Third Age, for people who don't know that.
Yes.
The university is not a university as we think of it. It's simply a place where you can learn things. 3A, of course, is older people, and so it's a place for older people. We've got 600 members, I think, in Purbeck U3A, and I run this Science and Technology Group with 140 members, and we have talks every month which are in a hall, but I also live stream them on Zoom as well, for members that for one reason or other can't get to the actual meeting hall itself. So that keeps me pretty busy one way or another, as well as running a walking group for older people as well. But there we go. That's just about it.
Very good. Right, John, thank you very much.